Welcome back to Learning with Crystal K. Today we will continue reading The Mona Lisa Vanishes, a legendary painter, a shocking heist, and the birth of a global celebrity. All right, we are going to continue reading. In Milan, Leonardo is commissioned to sculpt a statue of a horse, a tribute to the Duke's father. Leonardo sketches out a monumental statue rising some 25 feet high. He decides to cast it in a single piece. It will require pouring 80 tons of melted metal in a single form. No one has done this before. It is not clear it can be done. Any flaw, any weakness, and the statue will crack. There is an easier way. Leonardo could cast the horse in pieces, and the pieces could be seamlessly joined. Since the horse is so large, it makes sense to cast it in pieces. But Leonardo doesn't want to. That's the only part of the problem. The other part is Leonardo wants his horse to be larger than life and exactly like life. He wants every muscle, every vein to be accurate. To do this, most artists would observe horses, and Leonardo does exactly that. But he also dissects horses. Then he writes an entire book about horse anatomy. This is all preparation. Finally, Leonardo constructs a clay model of the horse, which he needs to make the mold for the casting, and the model becomes the wonder of Milan. So does Leonardo himself. Neither Greece nor Rome ever saw anything grander. A Milan resident writes, "See how beautiful this horse is? Leonardo da Vinci alone has created it. Sculptor, fine painter, fine mathematician, so great an intellect rarely does heaven bestow. Everything is on schedule, which is to say everything is way behind schedule. It's Leonardo. Isn't really a schedule, but everything is good. Everything is fine until the French invade. Behind King Charles VIII, French armies pour down the Italian peninsula. After initially aiding Charles, the Duke turns against him to win the war, though he needs more cannons. To make cannons, he needs more metal. Imagine the Duke looking around for bronze, the material he desperately needs, and discovering that some 80 tons of it are reserved for a statue of a horse. The bronze is melted down, the cannons are made, the statue is not. Leonardo is brokenhearted. In his papers, there's a letter he writes and does not send to the Duke. It's torn in half. At the end, it reads, "And the horse, I will say nothing because I know the times." Years later, when the French reach Milan, they use the clay model for target practice. It falls into thousands of pieces. It's a tragedy. But it's also a half decade since Leonardo got the commission. When Michelangelo mocks Leonardo for not delivering the goods, this is what he seizes on. "You had 80 tons of bronze, and you still couldn't get that statue done, you fool." Michelangelo is being unfair. Michelangelo is being a jerk. Everyone agrees that Michelangelo was a jerk. The statue really was an unprecedented project. But Michelangelo also has a point. Leonardo had the time. He had the materials. He ended up with nothing. For his next act, Leonardo starts work on a mural in Milan Monastery. It's a depiction of the last meal with Jesus shares with his disciples. And Leonardo uses the mural to tell a story about how the disciples, Judas betrays Jesus. The word story here is key. The characters in the mural, like characters in a movie, react to each other. As the story of Judas's betrayal works its way down the table, the mural itself seems to move. Painting the mural takes Leonardo forever, of course. There are stories about him standing in front of the painting for days without touching his brush, or arriving, adding a couple brush strokes, and then leaving. The head of the monastery, the prior, pesters Leonardo to hurry up already. The Duke summons him to ask what's taking so long. Leonardo explains that he's been unable to find the right model for Judas. "It's hard to find a face so wicked," he says. But he adds mischievously, maybe he could simply use the pestering prior as a model. The Duke doubles over with laughter. The prior relents. Finally, Leonardo reaches. He finishes. he really actually, but no buts about it, finishes. However, just as he decided to cast the horse in a wholly new way, Leonardo decides to paint his mural in a wholly new way. The standard way to paint a fresco, a painting on a wall, is to use water-based paints on fresh plaster. Leonardo does not want to do this. In his paintings, he prefers oils, which allow him to work slowly. Fresh plaster does not allow for this leisure. He has to paint while the plaster is still wet. Leonardo makes up his own technique as he goes along. He coats the dry plaster wall with primer, then uses a mixture of oil and water paints. It works. The fresco is incredibly subtle and layered. Leonardo has transferred his oil technique to fresco painting. No one has ever done it before. No one will ever do it again. Within a few decades, the paint begins to flake away. Then it falls off altogether. Within a half century, it is hardly there. It's described as a model of blots. Today, the only work of art in the world as mobbed as the Mona Lisa is the Last Supper. It is a wonder, but can we see it only because it has been restored extensively? The Last Supper we see today is a recreation. We have only a glimpse of what Leonardo actually painted. The Last Supper will crumble, the horse will never cast. Leonardo has completed a few paintings of Milan, and he's done a lot of thinking, but little has been left for the future. When King Charles VIII and his French army finally reach Milan, the Duke's court flees. Leonardo stays for 6 weeks, trying to see what the new possibilities are. He's playing both sides. It's a dangerous game, and Leonardo has not quite adjusted to it. In his notebooks, there's a strange sentence: find Ingel and tell him that you will wait for him at Amor, and that you will go to him in Iplum. Ingel, Amor, Iplum. There are all names written backward. Ingel is Legini, or the Count de Gin, the French military chief. Amor is Roma, or Rome. Iplima is Napoli, or Naples. This is Leonardo, among the most brilliant minds of his era, writing in code. His code is simply to write the words backward. It must be the worst code in history of codes. A dolphin could decipher this code. It gets even worse. Leonardo's handwriting is a mirror script. He writes everything in the opposite direction and backward. It's called mirror script because if you put Leonardo's writing in front of a mirror, it's reversed and perfectly readable. Mirror script is often thought to be a code of its own. It's not. At the time, it's a known way for left-handers to write more comfortably. The way they wouldn't smear the ink as they moved their writing hand across the page. But for this code note, it is an unintended side effect. Since Leonardo was already writing backward, all this backward names are written forward. Amor isn't in mirror script, it's just Roma. Anyone can read it. You don't even have to hold it in front of a mirror. All of this is very charming and very human. Leonardo da Vinci, he does boneheaded things just like the rest of us. His flirtation with the French does not last. Leonardo flees Milan too. Sell what you cannot take with you, he writes. He takes his half finished work of almost 20 years, piles it into a cart, and leaves it for Florence. Leonardo has to abandon the city where he came into his own. He has to flee back to a city that he's already fled from. He's almost 50 years old. He's homeless. The invading King Charles VIII of France was foolish and reckless. He's mostly known today for marrying a woman who was already married and for dying from hitting his head on a door frame. But we owe him. Without him, Leonardo would likely have never left Milan. Without him, the Mona Lisa would never existed. For over 100 years, the Louvre has been a quiet place. Before 1911, only a few hundred people visited each day, and fewer in summer. They vanished into a complex the size of a small city. The Louvre could be open and feel like it was closed. That was about to change. After a week of police occupation, the Louvre reopened to the public. Paris had been spellbound by breathless Mona Lisa coverage. Now Parisians swarmed the scene of the crime. They came by the thousands. There had never been lines at the Louvre before. There have there had never been lines at the Louvre before. Suddenly the lines went around the block. The Louvre had never seen such crowds. They were all there to see something that couldn't be seen. The visitors who filed into the Salon Kier didn't look at the extraordinary painting still in the room. They looked at where another painting used to be. People came to the Louvre to see a ghost. A journalist did a survey. Most people there had never seen the Mona Lisa before. In other words, they come not to see a painting that they never seen. Bouquets were laid, notes were left, tears were shed. The Louvre felt less like a museum and more like a funeral home. The scene repeated itself daily for weeks. The missing Mona Lisa became a tourist attraction. It even attracted the young, depressive Franz Kafka, soon to be a great writer, now aimlessly wandering around Europe. He and his friend Max Brod did the full Mona Lisa tour. They stared at the blank wall and then they went to a silent comic film on the theft. The Mona Lisa was already a movie star. In the short film, the Louvre administration is incompetent, the police are inept, and the museum is in pandemonium. There's so much chaos that no one notices. When the thief brings the Mona Lisa back, he leaves a note. Blame my poor eyesight. I wanted the painting next to her. Franz Kafka liked the movie. The incompetence of the Louvre was not a national joke, and the newspaper, the modernist poet Guillaume Apollinaire, praised the portrait. The Mona Lisa was so beautiful that her perfection has come to be taken for granted. Then he attacked the museum. There is not even one guard per gallery. The situation is one of carelessness, negligence, indifference. The Louvre, he concluded with an insult designed to puncture French pride, is less well protected than a Spanish museum. When the museum reopened, the Paris Journal printed a sign to post it in the galleries in the interest of art and for the safeguarding of the precious objects. The public is requested to be good enough to wake the guards if they are found to be asleep. Outside the Louvre, the Mona Lisa appeared in advertisements for underwear. Her face was on chocolate boxes and posters for variety shows. She hawked cigarettes. She performed in cabarets. Songs were rewritten in her honor. A week after the theft, the Mona Lisa herself wrote to the La Petite newspaper. She was bored, she announced. With all this talk about her smile, she was not smiling mysteriously. She was smiling because she was filled with contempt for all the people who paraded endlessly in front of me. She had long desired, she wrote, to carry out my abduction. According to the Mona Lisa had kidnapped herself. The story of the theft spread far beyond Paris. It went global from the United States. The entire world sat back aghast. Nothing like the theft of the Mona Lisa had ever been perpetrated before in the world's history. From Canada, the eyes of the world have been in the past 2 weeks trying to follow the sensational flight by theft of the Mona Lisa. From Australia, energetic searchings continue for Leonardo da Vinci's La Joconde. From England, with typical understatement, there appears to be much mystery associated with the affair. The timing was just right. Newspapers could now print illustrations cheaply and well. They all ran illustrated supplements on the theft. The Mona Lisa became the most prominent face in the world, staring out of every newsstand. In France, after the theft, more people could identify the Mona Lisa than the president of the country. These reproductions were like the new, unnerving world of cinema, an image of something that no longer existed. The world could now see the Mona Lisa everywhere but the Louvre. Alphonse Bertillon had a perfect thumbprint, but nothing else. The Louvre employed almost 300 people, and many more had worked there or might know how its paintings were hung. The Paris police had to cast a wide net. There, they were interviewing every last person, but it was easy to see how someone might wiggle free. So far, there were no solid leads, and even worse, there were no matching prints. Without clues, the investigation didn't know who or what to focus on. In the absence of anything real, the same sort of stock characters kept coming up. They were types of people, like generic actors in a bad movie. But these imaginary people drove the investigation. They affected how the police thought about who was guilty, who was innocent, and who was worth another look. The first character, the secret admirer. The secret admirer was the Mona Lisa lover, so bewitched that it was always a he, stole the painting out of obsession. The German young man arrested early in the investigation, the Louvre visitor, who'd been a little too interested in the Mona Lisa, was a classic secret admirer type. That alone was enough to make him suspicious. The idea of the infatuated secret admirer loomed large throughout the investigation. The second, the lone madman. The authorities worried that the thief was an insane or crazy. This was the language they used. Their logic was simple. Only someone insane would try to steal the Mona Lisa. So the Mona Lisa must have been stolen by someone who was, well, insane. It was a theory composed entirely of circular logic, but it was at least a theory. Finally, there was the third and the most promising character, the consummate professional. The consummate professional was able to steal the Mona Lisa because he was the consummate professional, experienced, meticulous, motivated. The scale of the theft was a job for the consummate professional, not a secret admirer or the lone madman, or maybe the consummate professionals. The theft was too big to be the work of a single person. Instead, it might be a gang of professional art thieves. In 1911, stealing art was still new. Until recently, art hadn't been stolen, it had been pillaged. When Napoleon, the French emperor, invaded Italy at the end of the 18th century, he arrived with lists of what he wanted: hundreds of paintings, prints, sculptures. His army stacked it up and shipped it out. It was a stupendous haul, and it wasn't a secret. It was all done out in the open. Then it was all put on display. Most of the Italian art in the Louvre had been stolen by Napoleon. The Salon Care was lined with his plunder. Art was stolen by nations. Random people stealing art, that was something different. The Lapine and Bertillon, the idea of professional art thieves must have made the investigation more exciting. They would they would be people of the same high quality as Lapine and Bertillon themselves from the beginning of the investigation. Lapine favored the idea. We can guess what Lapine was thinking. Earlier that year, he'd written the introduction to a book on the new scientific policing. The book was one of his former assistants, and it provides a window into how Bertillon and Lapine thought. Just like society, crime was separated into classes. The book explained there were classes of thieves: those who specialized in audacious, difficult, profitable thefts, and those whose work was brutal and bloody. The superior thieves worked in a refinement of art. The lower class thieves, on the other hand, were sloppy. They left clues and devastation in their wake. The police, upon arriving at the crime scene, could tell immediately which class was responsible. If the scene was gory, messy, or clumsy, it was the work of a lower class. If the scene was elegant, sophisticated, or crafty, it was the work of the upper class. Plug in your adjectives and get your thief. It was as easy as that, except, of course, it wasn't. This wasn't good detective work. In fact, it wasn't detective work at all. There was no detection involved, it was all assumption. It was the opposite of observation, the opposite of how Leonardo would have wanted the Mona Lisa theft investigated. Unlike Leonardo, Bertillon and Lapine didn't start with the world, they started with what they assumed the world would be. They confused that with the actual world. Lapine was looking for a professional gang because it would represent a superior class of thief. His logic was the Mona Lisa heist was a refined crime. There was no blood on the walls of the Louvre, therefore, it was done by a better class of criminal. This type of thinking was so convincing that it led the investigation to become very strange places. It took the investigation to some very strange places. It led to the graveyard. Long before the Mona Lisa broke out of the Louvre and made her way onto the front pages, Adam Worth was a celebrity. To call him a thief sold him short. To police in the United States and Europe, he was the thief. For decades before the Mona Lisa theft, he'd been suspected of every con, every forgery, every eccentric scheme. If the job was brilliant, it might be the work of Adam Worth. In the Sherlock Holmes stories, Alphonse Bertillon was the great detective in Europe, but Professor Moriarty, the arch enemy of Holmes, was the greatest villain. He is the organizer of half that is evil, of and of nearly all that is undetected in this great city, Holmes said. He's a genius, a philosopher, and an abstract thinker. Professor Moriarty was based on Adam Worth. Worth came from nothing, a poor immigrant, to the United States. He deserted the Union Army during the American Civil War, faked his own death, and began a relentless rise to the top of the criminal world. He lived by his wits, not his fists. He never tolerated violence. The mark of the Worf job was impeccable planning, and he applied the same rigor to his own life. He carefully acquired all the qualities of a gentleman and moved to England, where he held court in a London mansion. He looked like a law abiding upper class Englishman to everyone but the authorities. They knew exactly who he was, but they never had enough evidence to arrest him. He never made a mistake. All that I ever require is 2 minutes of opportunity, Worth once said. If I do not find those 2 minutes, I give up the job. Usually I find them, and the 120 seconds methodically employed is enough for a man well trained in his specialty to accomplish a great deal. In 1876, after a series of brilliant bank heists and forgeries, he pulled off his greatest trick. He stole Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, by Thomas Gainsborough, the most famous painting in England. The Duchess was the great beauty of her age. She bewitched England while she was alive, and on canvas, she had the same magnetic effect. The Mona Lisa of its day, the portrait, was also famous for its smile, or half smile. Was it a smile? Was she looking at you? Was she flirting with you? You could hope. You could dream. Duchess of Devonshire had just sold for more money than any painting ever, and it was about to be sold for even more money to the American millionaire Junius Spencer Morgan. Before it could be sold, Worth stole it in the middle of the night without a trace. Then he did something curious. Nothing at all. He didn't sell the painting. He didn't even try to sell it. He carried the Duchess around the world with him, often sleeping next to it. The Duchess theft was the greatest art heist in history until the Mona Lisa went missing. The parallels were uncanny. A beautiful woman, a legendary portrait, a smitten thief, a crime that showed patience and daring. A crime that defied logic, a crime carried out by a superior class of thieves. Everything suggested that the Mona Lisa theft was handled by Adam Worth, the gentleman thief. Everything suggested that the Mona Lisa theft was handled of Adam Worth, the gentleman thief. A French novelist explained in La Figaro that the painting only have been stolen by Adam Worth. The theory caught fire. The U.S. government told its officials on the Canadian border to watch for the Worth smuggling the portrait into the United States. Everyone was on watch from Adam Worth. There was only one problem. Adam Worth was dead, extremely dead. He died the decade before the Mona Lisa was stolen. It was an inconvenient fact because Adam Worth matched the Paris police's idea of the thief perfectly. He was the consummate professional. He created the template for an epic art heist. He made the mold. What the police wanted was someone who fit that mold. If Adam Worth wasn't available, they'd find someone. All right, we're going to stop there and we'll pick up with part 7 next time. Have a great day.